I'm here, Julie.
Great. Okay, hold on. Okay, Paul, are you ready? You are muted.
You're muted, Paul.
Sorry, I apologize. Yes, we're streaming to the cloud and to the webcast, so we're good to go on my end. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. I'm going to begin the hearing then. Good morning. The hearing board of the South Coast Air Quality Management District is in session. Today is September 16th, 2020. The time is 9:00 a.m. and we are meeting remotely via Zoom, given the current pandemic and the stay-at-home orders still in place in the state of California. We have one matter on the calendar for today, and that is Torrance Refining Company, LLC, case number 6060-11 for a short variance. And who is representing Torrance Refining this morning?
Good morning, Madam Chair. It's Michael McDonough from Pillsbury representing Torrance Refining.
Morning, Mr. McDonough. And who is representing the executive officer this morning?
Good morning, Karen Manwaring on behalf of the executive officer.
Thank you, Ms. Manwaring, and good morning. Let's begin with just a recitation of where we stand. The parties had requested that this matter be placed on the consent calendar. There were documents that were submitted to the board and the board has reviewed them. I understand that one member of the board has some outstanding questions and requested to remove the matter from consent. But we're going to begin with the marking some of the documents that we received for the consent and beginning from there. Beginning with, first I would like to mark as they are in, trying to find it, in the petition. There are 4 exhibits at the end of the petition, and we're going to mark them 1 through 4 as they appear in the petition. Then we also received the declaration of Valerie Shea in, I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly, in support of the petition for short variance. And I'd like to mark that as exhibit number 5. And I'm not going to mark the stipulation. So that's going to be exhibit number 5, sorry. I'm not going to mark the stipulation because this matter is no longer going to be on consent. However, I wanted to point out that and I wanted to express my appreciation to the parties for attaching this to the stipulation. It was an email from Charlie Smith, which I'm understanding to be the consultant. However, I don't want to mark it and I don't want to admit it because it's not relevant to this, unless you can tell me how it is. But it's not, I know that this is part of the overall project. However, it's not directly relevant and I don't want to raise questions outside of a noticed hearing on that issue. Ms. Manwaring, I saw you put on your camera. Did you want to address that at all or not at this moment?
Not at this time, thank you.
Thank you very much. So we'll just note for the record that we have it, and if it becomes relevant again in the other matter, then we'll admit it at that time. But I just wanted to express appreciation for submitting that to the board. So exhibit number 5, because we are not going to be marking the stipulation, I wanted to ask both parties if you still wish to have that submitted in evidence. Mr. McDonough, would you like that to be put in evidence?
Yes, Madam Chair. I think it would just be helpful to the board to have to show that the parties are in agreement that this petition should be granted.
Oh, are you referring to the stipulation?
Oh, I thought that's what you were talking about. I'm sorry.
I was referring to the declaration.
Oh, no, the declaration I think is probably better to just take the testimony from the witness here. So I don't think any need for the declaration. We'll be able to answer questions through her live testimony, through this one testimony.
Uh-oh.
Are we frozen?
Looks like Julie is.
Yeah, you guys are still moving, but I'm not hearing Julie anymore.
Julie's frozen.
Maybe she was so taken with what we said that she's speechless.
In shock.
I think that's what it is.
Oh my gosh. Okay, I'm sorry. Do you all hear me? I was lost there.
Yeah, you're back now.
You're back.
I'm really hoping this isn't going to happen to me throughout the entire hearing. Okay, I don't know where I left off, but the stipulation is not going to be marked. Okay, but I would like to place the declaration of Ms. Valerie Shea in evidence. And the question, Mr. McDonough, is whether you would like that.
Yeah, it's Shea, and
Sorry, Shea.
again, I'm happy with placing the evidence, but obviously she's present and available under oath to answer the questions. So, to the extent that there's any questions or inconsistencies, she's here, so she can answer the questions directly.
Thank you. And it's my intent to begin with the declaration, since we all have that, place it in evidence, and then ask any additional questions if there are any. And so I just wanted to ask Ms. Manwaring if you have any objection to that being placed in evidence.
No objections to the declaration and to evidence. Thank you.
Thank you. Exhibit number 5, the declaration of Valerie Shea, will be placed in evidence. And finally, we had 2 proposed orders. A second one was sent, I believe, yesterday, and it was amended. And so I'm only going to mark the newer order, which was amended, and I'm going to mark it as exhibit number 6. Okay, the proposed findings that we received yesterday will be marked as exhibit number 6. Okay, and with that, I'm going to ask anyone who wishes to testify today, Ms. Shea and anyone else who is present and wishes to testify, including any members of the public who might wish to be heard. Please raise your right hand to be sworn in. Do you promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God? Just you could shake your head. Okay.
I do.
Okay. Thank you. All right, and with that, Mr. McDonough, if you would like to give an opening, this would be a good time.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and please, obviously, just somebody wave at us or let us know if you're not hearing me or the witness well. We're using the computer audio, so I'm always a little paranoid that we're going to be feeding back. But good morning, Madam Chair and members of the board. I am Mike McDonough from Pillsbury. I'm here today on behalf of Torrance Refining Company. We're seeking a short variance and alternative operating condition. We hope that this is a fairly straightforward case. The refinery is seeking variance relief so that it can install a new selective catalytic reduction system, or SCR, and an accompanying continuous emissions monitoring system, or SEMS, for boiler 2F4, along with a new stack for that boiler. You will hear in testimony the new SCR is not only going to help the refinery comply with upcoming changes in the reclaim rules, but it's also going to be a big win for the air, since it will enable the refinery to reduce its annual emissions of oxides of nitrogen, or NOx, from the boiler by 330,000 pounds per year. So that comes out to 165 tons per year less NOx emissions going to the atmosphere as a result of this work. So that's all great, but in order to safely install the new SCR and the SEMS to accomplish all that, the refinery is going to need to shut down boiler 2F4 and disconnect the existing SEMS. Now, the boiler is going to be offline and blinded for the entire installation work. So you're going to hear there's no possibility of emissions from the boiler during the installation of all this new equipment. But because district rules only allow for a maximum of 8 days of downtime of the SEMS for maintenance, having a SEMS disconnected for any longer than 8 days results in a violation of your permit conditions and district rules. So it requires the facility to seek a variance. And as you'll hear in the testimony, the planned replacement work for the SEMS, SCR, and stack is rather extensive. There's crane work involved, so it will take roughly 6 weeks to complete. And so for that reason, it's not possible for the facility to complete the work in the 8-day period provided by the rules. Specifically, you'll hear that the facility is seeking a variance from a number of rules. One is the various subparts and appendices of District Rules 2011 and 2012. Those are all listed in detail in the petition. But those rules essentially all require that the SEMS be connected and monitoring the boiler at all times. We are also asking for a variance from the administrative condition E8 of the permit to operate, and that requires compliance with all of the district rules and regulations. So by definition, any violation of rules also violating that first sentence of E8. We're also asking for a variance from section F, condition 1A1 and 3D1 of the facility permit. Those conditions also require continuous operation of the SEMS at all times. We're also asking for a variance from section section G, as in girl, conditions 1, Roman numeral 1, 1, Roman 2A1, and Roman 3D1 of the permit. Again, these are conditions that require continuous collection and daily reporting of the SEMS data to the district. And finally, we'll be asking for relief from rules 203B, 2004 F1, and 3002 C1, all of which require operation and compliance with the permit conditions. So I'm here today with Ms. Valerie Shea, who is the refinery's environmental engineer, and she will discuss the proposed SCR and SEMS installation in more detail. So you'll hear in the testimony that it's variance relief is necessary because the facility cannot avoid disconnecting the existing SEMS, as it's going to replace it with a new SEMS and a new SCR system, which the refinery has to do to comply with some upcoming reductions in allowable NOx emissions under the reclaim rules. The facility is actually looking forward to the work because it will substantially reduce NOx emissions from this boiler, and it will be very good for the air. But having that SEMS disconnected for any reason over 8 days is a violation of the permit and district rules that we described. Unfortunately, that's the case even if the refinery is doing the work to install a new pollution control device. And even if the boiler itself is shut down and can't emit at all during the work. So it is beyond the facility's reasonable control to avoid disconnecting the existing SEMS in order to install the new one and the new SCR system. And you'll hear that the time to do this work is now. Given that the new reclaim requirements will be coming in 2021, and given that the facility has timed the work to coincide with the boiler's upcoming Cal OSHA Title 8 inspections, which already require the shutdown of this boiler for inspections by September 18th. You'll hear that denying the variance and requiring strict compliance will result in arbitrary or unreasonable taking of property. It would not only prevent the refinery from installing beneficial emissions controls, but it would also force the refinery to attempt to comply with reclaim by purchasing more reclaim trading credits. And you'll hear that the upcoming sunset of the reclaim program has made these credits much harder to come by and much more expensive. And in the future, district rules will not even give the facility the option to comply through buying credits. So the refinery eventually will be forced to install these SCR emissions controls, and we think better sooner than later. For that reason, denying the variance requiring strict compliance would produce no corresponding benefit in reducing air contaminants. Actually, would prevent the facility from immediately decreasing its future NOx emissions by 165 tons per year. And you also will hear the facility is considered curtailing operations. They will, in fact, be completely shutting down boiler 2F4 during this work, which will allow us to prevent any emissions from the unit during the variance period. But further curtailment or shutting down the facility would not avoid the need for the variance, since it's the disconnection of the SEMS for longer than 8 days that requires the variance. And that's regardless of whether the rest of the facility is operating or not. And finally, Ms. Shea will confirm that aside from the boiler 2F4 SEMS, the refinery is going to continue operating all of its other emissions monitoring systems as usual, and they will continue duly reporting all that data to the district. You'll see in the exhibit 6, we've agreed with the district on a set of proposed variance and AOC conditions for the board's consideration that will require the facility to keep the district fully apprised of each step of the process. We've already begun that process, as you'll hear, of notifying the district of key events during the work. And for all those reasons, we respectfully request that the board grant the requested short variance and AOC. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McDonough. Ms. Manwaring, would you like to give an opening?
Yes, thank you. Good morning. I'll be very brief. Good morning, board members, and especially welcome and good morning, Dr. Lee. Mr. Ms. Prusek, I'd like to thank you for how you acknowledged the attachment to the stipulation. Because the work under that matter is going to be done under the term of this variance as described in the petition, it was my first opportunity to be responsive to the board's concerns. So thank you for receiving it and no objections to it not being admitted into evidence. Installation of an SCR is desirable. It's consistent with the district's goals under the Reclaim program, and the district does not object to the requested variance, subject to the conditions that were reviewed and agreed to by the district. Additionally, when the oath was given, you have noticed that Mr. Stanford and Mr. Caballero are available. Paul Caballero is familiar with the facility as an inspector. Mr. Bob Sanford is familiar with the Reclaim program. So again, no objections to the request.
Thank you. Before you introduce Ms. Shea, Mr. McDonough, I just wanted to let you know, we could truncate this process since we do have the declaration. If you would like to, it's up to you. You can have Ms. Shea summarize the work to be done, add anything additional that you wish, and then open it up to board member questions. But that's up to you, however you wish to proceed. And you may introduce Ms. Shea.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I appreciate that. And maybe what we will do is present you a very truncated version of her testimony and then allow you guys to ask questions. It does mostly reflect what you see in the declaration, but there's been a few slight schedule changes that I'll want her to speak to that are not reflected in the declaration. So that will help supplement the story. But yeah, we'll try to keep it brief and to the point. And with that, I'll introduce Ms. Valerie Shea. Ms. Shea, could you state and spell your name for the record?
Good morning. So my name is Valerie Shea. That's Valerie. Last name is Shea, spelled Tse.
And what is your position at the refinery?
I'm the environmental supervisor for the Torrance refinery.
Okay. And for the record, could you just confirm for us that you're familiar with the petition for short variance in the AOC and that those correctly facts of the case?
Yes, I am familiar with the petition in the LOC and it correctly reflects.
I'm sorry, Ms. Shea, can you speak louder? There is some background noise and you, at times, you're getting drowned out a little bit.
Yes, I am familiar with the petition and the AOC and it correctly reflects the facts of the case.
Okay, and then could you just give us a very brief overview of why the refinery is seeking a short variance in AOC today?
Yes, so we want to install an SCR, that's the Syllabic Caloric Reducing System, to one of our boilers to F4. And in order to install that, we will need to disconnect the SEMS and the stack from the system to install it.
And is it possible to do that work while the boiler 2F4 is running?
No, the boiler, it's very hot and it would be dangerous to have people go in there while it's running. So we have to shut down the boiler.
Okay, and as you mentioned in your declaration, is it the refinery's plan that the boiler will remain down and offline for the entire work of installing the SCR and SEMS?
Yes, that's correct.
And how will you guarantee that the boiler can't emit at all during this work?
So what we've done is after the boiler was shut down, the refinery fuel gas lines, the piping that feeds into the boiler, they have been blinded and air gapped. So there's a physical barrier preventing anyone from accidentally turning on and lighting up the boiler. So that physically cannot happen.
Okay. And then as you reflected in your declaration, can you confirm for us, is the boiler currently equipped with a selective catalytic reduction device?
Currently, it does not have an SCR on the equipment.
And this would add an SCR to the boiler?
Yes.
And what kind of emissions reduction would you expect from adding the SCR to this boiler?
We expect about 333,000 pounds or 165 tons per year.
And that's savings of reductions of NOx from the boiler?
Yes.
Okay. And again, you stated this in your declaration, but why, again, briefly, is it beyond the facility's reasonable control to comply with the permit and district rules while it's installing the SCR and replacing the SEMS?
Yeah, so the reclaim rules require that the SEMS be operating at all times beyond. So it does allow the 8 days for maintenance work, but to install the SCR, it will be greater than the 8 days.
Okay, and what is it that takes longer than the 8 days here? I mean, what is the work involved here?
Yeah, so not only do we have to shut down the boiler, but then we have to dismantle the stack. We have to disconnect the SEMs. We have to install the SCR. There's going to be a lot of crane work involved in putting all the equipment in place. Testing that has to occur, and loading of the catalyst. So it's going to take about 6 weeks in total.
Okay, and has the refinery already received the district permit to construct and approval for this work?
Yes.
Okay, and have you kept the district apprised of the actions to date and planning to keep them apprised in the future?
Yes, we've notified them. So if you look at the proposed conditions, there was a number of notifications being before we shut down the boiler. So we made that notification on September the 12th. September the 12th.
Mhm.
Yeah. And then once the boiler was shut down, we had to install the blinds. So we notified the district that the blinds were installed on the 13th, as well as prior notifications that the SEMS was going to be coming down. So we made that notification again on the 13th. And then on the 14th, the SEMS actually became offline. And the inspector came out, Paul, came out on the 15th to take a look at the installed blinds and air gap on the 2F4.
And is the district aware that the work is not going to result in any emissions from the boiler? Any excess emissions from the boiler during the installation of the SEMS and the SCR?
Yes.
Does the work have to be done in a certain time frame?
Yes, it needs to be done before, yes, it needs to be done for a number of reasons now, because first of all, in addition to shutting down the boiler, there is the Title 8 Cal OSHA mandated inspections. That's due. And then on top of that, we have our permit to construct. And then in order to meet the lower supply of the NOx for next year, we need to install it this year.
Okay, now one change from your declaration is the proposed schedule for this work. Now, perhaps you could explain to the board when we propose to have the variance start and when we ultimately expect the work to be completed.
Yeah, so again, we have 8 days that the district rules allow for maintenance. So when we shut down or disconnected the SEMS on the 14th, 8 days will end on the 22nd, September the 22nd, 2020. So we'll need the variance coverage to start on the 22nd of September 2020 through the 6-week period. And that would end on November the 6th,
Okay.
2020.
And can you just confirm again for this entire time that the boiler has been down and the SEMS has been disconnected, that the boiler has been down that entire time as well?
That is correct.
Okay. And to date, you have not reported any excess emissions from this boiler during the work?
No, there actually are no emissions at all. I mean, we talk about excess emissions, but since the boiler is off, there's nothing burning. There are essentially no emissions at all currently because the boiler is off.
Okay. So why would it be unreasonable for the board to deny the variance and require strict compliance here?
It would be unreasonable because, first of all, we're trying to meet the reclaim NOx Shea, essentially, with the reductions in the NOx credits that we have out there. We felt that installing the SCR to meet those, to meet the dwindling supply out there would help. And additionally, the future of reclaim, where we're going to eventually go to the command and control, meaning that eventually these units are going to have a NOx limit on it anyway. So it would eventually require the SCR in the future anyway.
So would denying this variance have any benefit in reducing air pollution?
No, I mean, we'd eventually still have to do it anyway.
And isn't it the case that in fact granting the variance would allow you to reduce NOx by the 330,000?
That's correct. That's correct.
Is there any way for the refinery to curtail or shut down operations to avoid the need for variance here?
No, so first of all, the boiler itself is already shut down. There are no emissions from the boiler, but any curtailment of other equipment and units outside of that would still not help in this situation, because what we're trying to do is disconnect the stems from the unit. So the curtailing of other operations does not really, doesn't really change anything.
And is the refinery committing to continue monitoring, aside from this SEMS, of course, are you continuing to monitor and report all other emissions in the refinery as usual?
That's correct. We're not touching any of the other monitoring systems outside of the 2F4 work.
Okay, and can you confirm for us that Torrance refining is agreeable to the conditions reflected in Exhibit 6 in the proposed findings in order?
Yes, we are agreed to the proposed conditions.
Okay, I think that's probably it, Madam Chair, and if there's questions to follow up, we're happy to answer.
Sure. First, I'm going to ask Ms. Manwaring, although I anticipate there are no questions, but if you do have any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Prusek. I just have one question, please, Mr. McDonough. Well, two, if you'll excuse me. Mr. McDonough, could you please remind me, how do we pronounce your witness's name?
Shea?
Yes, Valerie Shea. Shea.
Ms. Shea. Okay, thank you, Ms. Shea. Thank you for that testimony and for the declaration that you prepared. One question. During your testimony just now, you described the schedule beginning on the 22nd and going through November 6th. My question to you is based on your understanding of the project. Is it possible that the work will be completed prior to November 6th and compliance would be achieved prior to November 6th?
Is it possible? I think it could be possible that it could, but let me look at the schedule here.
Ms. Shea, I heard you say it is possible. I'll certainly give you a moment to correct your testimony, but let me just make my point so we can move on. Ms. Prusek, I believe if the board makes a motion, it may be appropriate to amend the term with a simple phrase or until compliance is achieved, whichever occurs first.
That's okay. Yeah, I'm okay. Yeah.
That would be consistent with the obligations around a variance. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that.
All right.
Okay.
No other questions from the district. Thank you.
Thank you. Board members, did anyone have questions that were not answered in the declaration or in Ms. Shea's additional testimony today? Ms. Verdugo-Peralta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm looking at the proposed findings and decision and order granting a short variance and alternative operating condition on page 5, line number 12 and 13. You're describing how the condition will be monitored and otherwise quantified emission levels from the source. Can you explain a little bit further exactly how it's going to be monitored, what's going to be utilized to monitor?
Sorry, we were muted.
So one of the conditions is that although we have the blinds in place, so there are physical barriers that prevent the fuel gas from going there. I think what this is referring to is the fuel gas flow, that they will also be providing data to the district regarding the flow in addition to the physical barriers.
And can you clarify, is that condition number 4 to the proposed order?
Yes. Yes. Oh, we're on
Yeah,
mute?
could you hear us all right?
Did you hear us?
She answered yes.
Yes, we heard that.
Yeah, I think if you're looking at Exhibit 6 as well, I believe this is on This may be page 5, condition, subcondition F of, let me see what number that is. That is number 2. So in 2F, under the first A, finding of fact. I'm sorry, it's basically just F. It's not 2. It's just F of the findings of fact. That the condition under that, petitioner will monitor emissions during the various pre-AOC period. That's where we've made the condition to monitor emissions. But the,
Okay, I see that, and that's what I'm referring to.
right.
But my question is exactly how are you going to do that? What,
Okay, and that
Oh,
may be the
so-
reference to
So
condition.
there's a fuel flow meter. So we are gonna be providing the and ensuring that ensuring that is minimal. There will be some noise levels in there because it is at 0, and because there's going to be an air gap and a blind in place.
And we might also refer you to the conditions at the end of the order. This would be on pages 7 and 8. That order, which provide the specific conditions on when the refinery would be notifying the district of certain events, including confirming the maintenance of the blind and the air gap on the gas header and verifying that no fuel is being fed. These are conditions 3 and 4.
Yeah. Because, I mean, essentially, there aren't going to be any emissions. So to show that there are no emissions, we're going to have to show that there are no flow going into the boiler. So that's what we mean. It's a fuel flow meter that will show that we don't have any flow going. And then we have the physical barrier that we've submitted pictures to AQMD that's showing the air gap so that it would be impossible to turn on that boiler.
okay, and I'm also looking at page 6 of the same document. My concern is actually more on the SCR and the type of SCR that's going to be utilized. Another
Oh. Cynthia, we're not hearing you.
general, any schools or,
I'm sorry, can you repeat your question? Because you froze.
oh,
At the beginning
sorry,
of your
okay.
question.
My question is more about the SCR, the selective catalytic reduction device. And one of my questions is how close is your facility to any sensitive receptors, whether that is a school or a hospital or daycare center or neighborhood?
Sorry. Can you hear us
So
okay?
all of that is reviewed by the district during the permitting process.
I understand that, but do you know how far it is, your facility, that this work is going to be taking place, how close that is to any neighborhood and or sensitive receptors?
I will have to find out from somebody on my team to get that exact information. Can I have a moment? And
Yeah, I mean, we can look up, just keep in mind, Mr. Verdugo Peralta, the SCR is actually not subject to the variance. It's really just the disconnection of the SEMs. That's the need for the variance, not the installation or non-installation of the SCR. They're not actually required to have an SCR in place. They've chosen to do so because they're trying to comply with reclaim. But that said, if you still want us to track down answer to local receptor, we may need a few minutes to track that down for you.
Yes, please.
Okay,
Okay. Want to take a few minutes off the record?
that'd be appreciated. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Take a few minutes off the record and we'll go back on the record when Mr. McDonough indicates that they are done.
So, Madam Chair, we're ready to go back on the record when you're ready.
Okay, Dr. Bernstein, are you still present? Great. Okay, we are back on the record.
Okay, so the nearest receptor is about close to a mile. But the more important thing that I wanted to bring up is, during the district evaluation of the permit of the SDR, they do run the health risk analysis, and it's been found to, we're not allowed to be greater than 1 in a million. So we are below that, and the district has approved of the permits to construct this SDR. So they do take that into account when they're evaluating all of this.
And thank you for that answer. I just wanted to reiterate for the board that what Mr. McDonough had mentioned earlier about the topic of the hearing today is merely the SEMS being disconnected. And so I allowed that question to be asked since it was important to Ms. Verdugo-Peralta, but it is not, there's not a lot of relevance to that. Is there a, did you have other questions, Ms. Verdugo-Peralta?
No, no, I'll just make a statement when it's appropriate after.
Okay.
After
During deliberation would be
Yes.
great. Okay. Mr. Balagopalan, you had indicated you also had questions.
Yes. Ms. Shea, it looks like you've taken all the appropriate steps. You have notified the district appropriately on September 12th that you shut down the boiler, and then in subsequent actions you took, like taking the SEMS offline, you've been keeping the district informed, and the district inspector was out there on September 15th to check that the blinds, there was a, it's blinded and there's an air gap. Am I correct?
That's correct. The inspector, Paul, came out for a field verification.
Now, I think testimony earlier, I think in the opening statement, this boiler would have been shut down on September 18, regardless, correct, for the OSHA inspection?
That is correct.
And normally, I'm sorry.
Sorry. We typically try to combine work, so we're not having to start up just to shut back down, a few months later. So we want to just do everything together. Is typically how we do things.
Right, that makes sense. How long does the inspection take?
I think based on my based on the schedule here, it looks like it's, well, I think it's embedded within here, but it looks like it's about the 3-week period. About 3 weeks.
And the reason I'm asking, I know the petition mentioned that the inspection would include doing non-destructive testing, hydrostatic testing, looking for leaks and so forth. What happens? Is there potential for delay if some abnormality or some repairs needs to be done, or there's some damage to the water pipes or so forth?
Yes, that is correct. There could always be some kind of findings. We try to anticipate as much as we can and build that into the schedule. But yes, there's always that possibility.
Is there a possibility that the OSHA inspector, is that somebody from OSHA will come and check it off? Is that correct?
I'm not that familiar with that piece of it, but my understanding is that they will not, that typically does not happen.
Is there any possibility that the repairs or the testing shows there is some damage that will require the boiler to be offline for a longer period of time?
There's always that possibility, yes. But so I had previous discussions with the inspector that is knowledgeable about this piece of equipment. And we run pretty high grade, pretty clean water through that stuff. So this boiler has actually lasted, has done pretty well as far as the reliability of it, because we do put the type of water that we're running through it is pretty, I forgot what the word is, but I'll have to find the email from that. But so we really, the inspectors really don't anticipate any substantial unanticipated type of work that's not planned for it, because we currently don't really have any reason to believe that.
So that's built into your expected date of November
Yeah, it's
26th.
still in the history based on what's running through it. And this is just based on what the inspector that we reached out to when we had inquired about the maintenance and the history of this boiler, what we would expect, and that was his comment.
Michelle, can you clarify when you say inspector, it's not the AQMD inspector, but
No, it's our internal inspector.
your inspector? Okay.
They go out there and they do a lot of inspection on multiple equipment.
Okay. So just to, now, I think it was mentioned that this is going to reduce approximately 165 tons per year of NOx because it's an uncontrolled source right now. What will be the, assuming, I saw in the engineering evaluation and the petition, it's about a 95% assumption for the efficiency.
Yeah.
So about 8-9 tons will still be emitted after the controls. Is that?
Let me see. I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, so I'm just doing back of the calculations. So, just in the last quarter, with about 100,000 pounds from this. So times 400 minus the 330. Oh wait. So I think we'll still have about, and this is just rough back of the calculations, maybe about 60,000 pounds for the year versus like maybe like 400,000, and that's just
Yeah, that's
just to give you an idea. It could be a range. It depends on our refinery rates. Going from year to year. That kind of thing.
And before you ask another question, I just want to again step back and remind the board that we are not evaluating the SCR project. The issue today is simply whether the SEMS should be disconnected, or and we should be granting a variance for that. But in that extent, the beneficial uses of, or the benefit of what this project will do, I think is relevant. But again, we're not evaluating the SCR.
No, and that's why I was asking for those. There's a substantial reduction from this project. There's no questioning of.
We're looking at, if right now when it averages about 130 parts per million, and if you look in that statement of basis and the guarantee from the company, it's going to be under 8 parts per million. So that's a substantial decrease.
Okay, that's all. Just one last question. How old is the boiler?
So I think we said it was 54 years old. It was, but I think it's more like 53 because I forgot to account for the startup. So even though it was built in, what did we say it was?
No, that's fine. I think
Commission is
that's what.
So I was kind of off by about a year.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for those questions. Oh, did you want to add to that, Michelle?
Yeah, I should note that even though the boiler is that old, usually it's, during inspections, when we find things, there are certain parts that get replaced. So, so it's kind of a hard question to answer when we talk about how old is the boiler and we think, oh, the boiler is so old, but really, I mean, there's sections that get replaced throughout the decades, I guess you would say. So there are some parts of it that are newer, some parts, and so maybe it's the shell of it that is about 53 years old. Just for your information.
Yeah, no, I've seen older ones at some other facilities. Thank you.
Thank you. Board members, additional questions for Ms. Shea? Senator. You are muted, just so you know. You are muted, Senator. You need to unmute yourself. There you go.
On the last paragraph of your declaration, you say that compliance will be achieved by November 4th, but you corrected that today with your testimony saying it'll be November 6th. And when I look at line 24 of your declaration, you talk about what are the, other operational priorities, which could be a determining factor in terms of when you might have the completion date and test. What are those operational priorities? Because that could determine the outcome.
So first of all, originally we did say we had wanted the November the 4th, but we felt like the end of the week would have been a better date. So that's why today I'm testifying that we want it through 11/6. And then as far as the operational priorities, what that was referring to was why we had delayed the shutdown of the boiler by a week, because it had coincided with some other units and equipment that we were starting up that we felt like we needed to have focus on those as a priority before we shut down the boiler.
Well, is it possible for the completion date to vary based on this operational priorities? And September 4th was 2 days ago.
Yeah, the operational priority was referring to something different, not related to the shutdown and work and the startup of the boiler.
It says that due to other operational priorities, the shutdown of the boiler was delayed. So it does have an effect.
Okay. So what I would say to that is that our 2F4, the boiler, is now our priority because it's shut down, and we need to do the work, do the inspections as fast as as fast and as safely as possible. So I'm not sure how the priority that it's talking about, like I mentioned before, it was related to why we had delayed the shutdown by a week and why some of those dates have changed.
So we'll not have an adverse effect on the final completion date.
No, yeah, that's correct. That's correct.
All right.
Any other questions, Senator? Thank you for your question. Board members, any other questions for Ms. Shea? Okay. Thank you very much, Ms. Shea, for appearing today and for giving your testimony. Mr. McDonough, you have no other witnesses?
We do not.
Okay. And I know, Ms. Manwaring, you said that you have 2 witnesses that are available, but you don't intend to put them on unless there are questions. Is that correct?
Exactly.
Okay. So then I will first ask Mr. McDonough, would you have any questions for any witnesses from the district?
We do not.
Okay. Board members, are there any outstanding questions that you still have before we would deliberate that you would like answered by a district employee? Okay. Thank you very much, Ms. Manwaring, for making your witnesses available, and thank you to those witnesses for being available today. Okay, so if there are no other questions by the board or the parties, then I'm going to see if there's any member of the public who is present today. Take a look. Don't recognize anyone. So what I'm going to ask is if there is any member of the public who is present today who wishes to testify or give any type of comments, please raise your hand virtually. And you can do that by looking below and seeing that there's a place you can raise your hand, or by indicating either verbally by turning on your microphone or waving at me and turning on your camera. I'll give you a second to do that. Okay. I do not see any members of the public who wish to testify. So with that, I'm going to turn to Mr. McDonough for your closing.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll just be very brief. I think you can make the 6 findings that you're required to make here. There's clearly going to be a rule violation. You've heard in testimony it's unavoidable. If the facility is to install a new SCR and SEMS, they're going to have to disconnect the old SEMS. And that for longer than 8 days, that is going to necessarily violate district rules in their permit. You heard it's beyond their reasonable control to comply, because the work that they're planning is going to take longer than the 8-day grace period that they have allowed under district rules to be disconnected from the SEMS. So therefore, you also had strict compliance would be without any corresponding benefit in reducing air contaminants. It actually would save emissions to grant this variance. You've heard they've given consideration to curtailing operation. They will be curtailing and shutting down boiler 2F4. Further curtailment would not avoid the need for this variance. You've heard there will be no excess emissions to mitigate here, but that they will continue emissions monitoring and reporting with respect to all other aspects of their facility. And other continuous monitoring and reporting should remain unchanged. So I think for those reasons, you can make the findings here, and I believe the variance can be granted. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Manwaring, your closing.
Right. Thank you. The district desires installation of an SCR to further control NOx emissions, and we have no objection to the requested variance today.
Thank you. Board members, would anyone wish to begin our discussion, and we can all be part of it, of the 6 findings we need for the short variance today? Okay. Because I think I can make the findings and I can begin, and we can all join in. Hold on. I had my 6 findings. There they are. First of all, there are several sections of Rule 2011 and 2012, as well as several conditions of the petitioner's permit in which they would be in violation once that SEMS is disconnected and the time that they are entitled to have it shut down for has expired. That they would be in violation for not continually monitoring, as they are a reclaim facility and a Title V facility, and are required at all times, even when the boiler is disconnected, to operate the SEMS. So the first finding clearly can be made. However, I think it's important to note that currently there is no violation. And so petitioner is not currently in violation. The violation will occur once those 8 days elapse and the SEMS has still not been connected because the SCR has not been installed yet. So I believe that it is beyond their reasonable control that they would be in violation, as we've heard and as we've read in the papers as well. The reclaim credit shave isn't coming into effect, and so they are required to reduce their NOx credit somehow, and so they are choosing to do it by installing a new SCR on the boiler. And also, as we also heard, and we know, reclaim is phasing out, and eventually we will be under command and control. And at that point, it is very much almost a certainty, but very likely that SCR would be required anyway. And so petitioner wishes to install it. And importantly, it is extremely beneficial. We've heard of the tremendous savings we're going to see both in the area and in our region, since NOx is a is a smog pollutant. We're going to see it throughout our region as well, but extremely beneficial. So I believe it is beyond their reasonable control. We heard that the boiler needs to be shut down and the stack and new SEMS needs to be put in so the SEMS cannot continue to monitor even though the boiler is out of commission. If we do not give a variance today, it would be an arbitrary taking of property. Essentially, they would be out of compliance. They would, if we really made them be in compliance with rules and regulations, they would not be able to install the SCR actually, because they would have to keep the SEMS in operation, and we don't want that. We certainly don't want that. This is, again, a beneficial project, and we do not want to see it not go forward. And certainly they would be subject to fines for having no emissions, let alone no excess emissions. And I think that that would be unreasonable taking as well. That closing or taking would be without a corresponding benefit in reducing air contaminants. Again, the conditions, both of the variance and the AOC that's being requested today, and I should have said, let's bifurcate our discussion and start with the variance since we are considering an AOC. So I'm speaking only for the variance, but we'll incorporate this later for the AOC. But it is a beneficial project. There are no excess emissions. There are no emissions because it has to be shut down. The boiler has to be shut down during the installation. And so as a result, I can certainly make that finding that the closing or taking would be without a corresponding benefit in reducing air contaminants. And I was about to say that both conditions 3 and 4 of the variance, as well as AOC 3 and 4, require that that blind to be installed in the gap. And we heard that that's already been done. And also for any fuel usage to be monitored to ensure that in fact the boiler is not being run. Curtailing emissions in lieu of a variance is not viable. They're already shutting down the boiler. That's why they're here asking for the variance in the first place. And so the shutdown of the boiler is not negating the need for a variance. It's actually causing the need for the variance. Well, the work that's being done. Reducing excess emissions to the maximum extent feasible. There are no emissions. And again, monitoring, and Ms. Verdugo-Peralta specifically asked that question, how will it be monitored? And as highlighted by the response by Ms. Shea, again, it's conditions 3 and 4, which are going to ensure that the boiler stays shut down and that in fact there is no fuel entering the boiler, and so there will be no emissions during the variance. Does anyone else have any thoughts on the findings? Okay. So I'm going to.
Ms.
Oh,
Perza,
sorry.
I'm sorry.
I
I was just, I.
Mr. Bhagopal, then Ms. Verdugo-Peralta.
Oh, am I going first? Okay.
You go first.
Oh, okay. No, I agree with all your finding, except as in cases on this nature, except for the first finding. I find it very hard to find a violation of the rules. I think the facility has taken the appropriate steps. They've notified the district inspector has gone and verified that they've put the blind and on the gas heaters, and there's no source of fuel going to the boiler, and the boiler is shut down, and the boiler was going to be shut down for the OSHA inspection anyway. So there's no source of emissions. In my understanding and the way I interpret it, the 96 or the 8 days is if the source was operating and the SEMS was not, and they needed more time for the SEMS to be non-operational because the source is still emitting emissions. In this case, as we all know, that the boiler is shut down, that's been verified by the inspector. I find it hard, again, in cases of this nature that I've in the past also said, I find it very difficult to find the finding of that they're in violation of the rule, because the source it's a non-source, it's not operating, it's shut down. And while I think the project needs to go on, they need to put the SCR to meet the requirements of the NOC and the significant reduction that we're going to get from that, it's all laudable, and I think it's great. It's just that, as in the past I've mentioned, I think this should have been probably handled as an enforcement discretion. In a way, the enforcement has gone and verified it, and not as a, and I find it hard to believe that now they'll go back and say, hey, here's your notice of violation because the board didn't grant the variance. But, and that's all I want to say. I cannot make that first finding, but I agree with you on all the other 5 findings.
Okay, and as I always do, I do need to respond to that. And I just want to lay out the legal case for that. It is not upon us to interpret a rule or a regulation of the district or a permit condition that is clear on its face. If it is clear on its face and it requires continuous monitoring, then it requires continuous monitoring. If it does not have an explicit exception, if the boiler is shut down, if there are no emissions, then it is incumbent upon us to read what the rule says and to determine that there is in fact a violation if the SEMS is not operating. And I just want to point out that you mentioned you'd like to see it be an enforcement discretion. If you think enforcement discretion is necessary, then you think it's a violation of the rule. And if you believe it's a violation of the rule, then you have to make that finding. It is not up to us to say, we think it should be different. We don't believe it should be that way. It's written for a reason, whatever the reason was, the governing board, we like it. Whenever SEMS are shut down, that for a certain amount of time, that parties have to come to the hearing board and prove their case. Otherwise, they could just interpret it any way they want. And finally, I just wanted to, and we don't want that to happen. And I just wanted to finally point out, 2 other things. One, it's not upon us to tell the district that it should be their enforcement discretion. That's their discretion. So it's not upon us to do that. And finally, again, I don't want us to be putting petitioners or facilities between a rock and a hard place. If the district testifies, well, they didn't testify. However, the district has told the facility, and the facility has told us that the district has told them that they do find it to be a violation. And in fact, they have agreed that a variance is necessary, which means they believe that there is a violation otherwise. That should be also very weighty evidence for us, because we don't want to put that to the test and say you can't get a variance, but then you have no other recourse if you stop the SEMS, even for a beneficial project. So for all those reasons, I would really encourage you to rethink the position that you're taking, because I don't believe that it is the way we should be interpreting our findings.
Yeah, I thank you for that. And I've cases like this, I've wrestled with it, and I've always had to see where my thinking is totally off, where I'm going wrong, and always have a difficult time. So I'm going to say no, because I cannot make that one finding, and I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Dugo-Peralta, you had thoughts.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's not that I can't achieve those findings. I can, and I appreciate the fact that 165 tons of NOx is going to be eliminated. That's huge. And the fact that they are going to be installing the SCR in preparation, I should say, of going from the process of the reclaim to command and control. But we're going to see a lot of companies doing this in preparation for that process. And while we are not looking at the SCR in this instance, it still remains a concern to me based on the fact that any type of ammonia slippage can possibly equal, and we know that ammonia is the precursor to PM10. That's my concern. And while we're not looking at it here, I know that this is going to come before us, like I said, time and time again. And I just feel that it's incumbent upon me to mention that, especially if we have a 1 mile between the facility and wherever the sensitive receptor is, whether it's a neighborhood or a hospital or a daycare, whatever it is. there's always a possibility. And that was my initial question, the type of SCR that was going to be installed, because some of them do have the possibility of that ammonia slippage. And that was the only reason I was bringing that up. I understand that we're looking at the SEMS and appreciate that they are going to be installing it. Like I said before, they're going to be installing the SCR way ahead of the time that they need to do this. But we're going to see this time and time again. So I can make the 6 findings. I can go forward with this, but I just needed to make notation of that. Thank you.
That's very appreciated. Dr. Bernstein, and then Mr. Balagopan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Once again, an excellent summation of the findings. In my opinion, straight up, the information has been provided, the previous hearings that we've had, the current testimony that was given today, and the information set for review. Clearly, in my opinion, the 6 findings are made specific to the SEMS, and I believe that we should grant the short findings.
You're cutting out at the very end there. Your audio.
I'm sorry. I believe that the 6 findings were in fact made. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bernstein. Mr. Balagopalan, you had additional thoughts.
I think Ms. Vertigopal asked what kind of ammonia injection. It's in the, I think they mentioned, I think they're using aqueous, not anhydrous ammonia, but she's right. There will be slip. There will be and it's limited by BACT to 5 ppm. It's also in there. So they are limited as far as the slip by BACT, but there will be ammonia slip, which as part of the ammonia injection. But it's aqueous, so it's not the anhydrous is a more dangerous form if there's a leak and release.
Thank you, Mr. Balagopan. That was why I was asking that question.
Okay. Yeah, I figured that. Yeah.
Important information to raise. Thank you. Senator, do you have any thoughts?
The question before us is this project necessary to reduce emission? The answer to that is
that
yes.
is not the issue before us. The issue before us, just to be clear, is whether we can grant a variance for the disconnection of the SEMS.
Finish, please.
Okay, but we have to be on track, please.
We will, and I'm on target right now when I finish. It's a worthwhile project. That's basically what I'm really trying to say. And that being the case, there got to be some modification in the system to reduce the emission. And when the permit has been granted and will be granted for that action, for that work to take place, during the time the work is taking place, they will be in violation. They're not in violation today, but they will be in violation. But this variance will give them protection to complete the project. And that being the case, giving all the circumstances associated with the project, I think that we find good cause to approve it.
Thank you. I think this discussion has been a very good one. Anyone else have any additional thoughts on the variance? We will separately cover the AOC. Senator.
Was I off target or did I explain it in detail?
No, very well. Thank you very much. And as always, your questions were very on target as well. But any other thoughts before I offer a motion? Okay, so I'm going to only make the motion first. Well, no. Let's discuss the AOC and then I can make the motion all together. And the reason why I'm going to do that, whereas I don't normally when there's a variance in an AOC, is because we have a proposed findings and decision, which includes both. And so that way I can make a clean motion, which will include the findings and decision. I'm going to just quickly discuss the additional findings we need to make for the AOC, because in this matter, really, there are no additional findings. Essentially, all the findings can be made because most of them have to do with whether or not there are excess emissions and whether this project alone would violate any NACs or cause a nuisance, etc. None of that applies. There are no emissions, no excess emissions. In addition, It's not because of a breakdown of equipment, it's because of the addition of an SCR and stack and everything else that's involved with that project. And it does not have to do with the startup or shutdown of any processes. And so those are, for the most part, the additional findings we need to make for an AOC. Anything else that we needed to make are in here as well. Whether, I think there's one more. Right, if the AOC would not result in non-compliance with the requirements of any NSPS or NESHAP, et cetera, and that is handled on pages 5 to 6 of the proposed findings and decision. And again, all those findings for an AOC can also be made. So when I make a motion, it will be for the variance in AOC, but I will ask if anyone else has any other comments or thoughts regarding the AOC. Okay, and just one more time, any other thoughts before I make a motion on the variance or the AOC? Okay, thank you. Then in the matter of Torrance Refining Company, LLC versus South Coast Air Quality Management District, case number 6060-11, I move that we grant the proposed short variance and alternative operating condition under Rule 518.2. I'm going to further move that we include the findings and decision found in exhibit number 6, which lays out both where the property is, the address being 3700 West 190th Street in Torrance, and also the equipment, that being the auxiliary boiler 2F-4 and the SEMS that serves it, and also summarizes the specific rules on page 3, A1, in which petitioner will be in violation, all having to do with the requirement that a SEMS be continuously monitoring emissions and be in good working order, including the permit conditions as well. I will make one amendment to page 7, which is the conclusion and order. And that will be, as Ms. Manwaring had suggested, on line 15, that the period would commence September 22nd, 2020, which is when the 8 days are up, and will continue through November 6, 2020, comma, or until final compliance, comma, whichever occurs first. Just need to make sure we do that as well for the AOC. Oh, perhaps, no, I think that covers both the AOC. Yes, it covers both. If I'm wrong, somebody will speak up, but I believe it covers both. And excess emissions are 0. And that completes my motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Who said that? Dr. Bernstein? Okay. Dr. Bernstein has seconded the motion. Is there any discussion on that motion? Okay. Senator, how do you vote?
Aye.
Ms. Verdugo Peralta, how do you vote?
Aye.
Mr. Balagopalan, how do you vote?
Yeah.
Dr. Bernstein, you vote?
Aye.
I vote yes. Motion passes 4-1. Good luck. This is a worthwhile project, and thank you to the parties for appearing today and providing additional testimony. And thank you again to the hearing board members for an excellent hearing, both questions and discussion. Is there any other business before we adjourn, board members? Okay, seeing none. Oh, sorry.
Happy New Year to each.
Yes, Happy New Year to you too. Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank
Be
you.
safe.
But
Thanks, Paul.